Will this creature ignite a new standard power combo, or is its timeline further down the road? Find out right now. Standard just got refreshed with a rotation, before that a couple of bans, and then on top of everything else, there's a brand new set that was recently added into the format with Edge of Eternities, which has shaken up the metagame in a couple of different ways, and also made it a ripe paradise for brewing. Now, older decks have lost key pieces of their builds, some of them finding success with some replacements, while others are still struggling and falling out of favor. Now, one such archetype is the Jund or Golgari Roots deck. Now, if you've watched my standard RCQ coverage the last few seasons, you know that I've tried early iterations of the deck and that I was a big proponent of the pure combo kill version as it went through iterations from more fair to unfair, topping RCs, and even showing up the Pro Tour. Now, this deck was pretty much DOA with the rotation as it lost 2 of its key pieces to winning: Tyvar, Jubilant Brawler, and Valdarin Thrillseeker. Now, Tyvar was the glue that held the deck together, allowing cards from Molt Tender to a Steelmancer Adept, and most importantly, all of our plant tokens we were making to use their abilities as soon as they hit the battlefield. Now, being able to mill over cards and trigger roots was also a bonus that Tyvar gave to our deck. Meanwhile, the Thrillseeker was the main win condition to the deck, as you were able to utilize it to throw everything you could, such as your growing collection of powered up plants at your opponent, and just bop them on the head with some botany. So why am I bringing up a deck that I said is basically dead on arrival with rotation? Well, I've inadvertently found a new combo that you can put into this shell that kind of revitalizes the combo kill aspect of the deck entirely. Now, although it may not be as consistent as previous versions of the deck, it utilizes a couple of new cards from Edge of Eternities and a slightly different strategy than some of the previous Roots decks. So if you want to do a little bit of reading ahead, I'm going to be talking about the combo pieces first before I start talking about a couple of different deck lists that I think they could fit into. Now, all of the deck lists that I'm going to be talking about in this video are going to be down in the description below. So if you want to just TLDR, look at the deck list, you can go ahead and do that. But if you want to understand how the combo works, we're going to jump into it right now. The strategy revolves around Timeline Culler, an uncommon Bloodghast variant that a lot of people have realized works extremely well in the Orzhov Sacrifice type list thanks to its special warp ability clause that allows it to be cast from the graveyard. Now, at first glance, a 2/2 with haste doesn't seem all that impressive, but the stats on the creature aren't quite as relevant as its keyword, haste. I'm looking to take advantage of its 1 mana warp cost and the fact that it can tap the same turn that it enters the battlefield to give us a pseudo Tyvar replacement. Now, taking a page from the Teamer Otter's deck, I want to pair Timeline Culler with Enduring Vitality. The 3 mana 3/3 in the Enduring Glimmer cycle turns all of your creatures into Birds of Paradise, basically giving you a creature version of Cryptolith Rite from older versions of Standards past. That means that our Timeline Culler can tap for black mana when it enters, allowing it to cast itself from the graveyard. Oh, but wait, we need a way to put it back in the graveyard first, don't we? Enter Umbral Collar Zealot. Whoa! Now, this is one of the most talked about uncommons, if not just cards in general, from Edge of Eternities. Much like Timeline Culler itself, the Zealot was immediately tagged into Mono Black and Orzhov Sacrifice lists, as it is not only a free sacrifice outlet, but one that helps fix the top of your deck thanks to Surveil, fueling graveyards for cards like Raise the Past to take full advantage of at the same time. Well, here we just need it as a way to sacrifice our Timeline Culler. By doing this, we have our floating mana from the color, thanks to Enduring Vitality, to recast the color for its warp cost, giving us as many spell casts, enters, and dies effects as we can pay life for. So if you're reading ahead, the last piece we need in this deck is our Blood Artist variant, so that way we can actually kill our opponents with all of our timeline culling. Vengeful Bloodwitch is the 2 mana variant that a lot of sacrifice lists are utilizing, so we're going to play that one too. Additionally, we're going to play a few copies of Sephiroth Fabled SOLDIer as a threat in and of itself, but also a way to flip an emblem in response to potential removal spells or board wipes, so we need one less piece of our puzzle when rebuilding. Now, Sephiroth in and of himself is a win condition that a lot of decks are going to want to answer, which takes the heat off of some of our smaller combo pieces while we're still building. So you may be counting on your fingers and toes and noticing something doesn't quite add up, and you'd be right. Although we have everything we need to combo kill our opponent, we're running into an issue with the fact that Timeline Culler needs 2 life in addition to that black mana cost in order to come back from our graveyard. That means with a single draining creature on our battlefield, we can only activate our Timeline Culler a total of 18 times, assuming we have a full 20 life, before we're at 2 HP and would have to lose the game to bring it back. Now, this could be solved by just simply having another drain effect, but that puts us at 5 total combo pieces on the battlefield in order to kill someone, and a lot of which are going to be around 2 or 3 mana, meaning the speed of our actual combo kills starts to come into question. Well, that's where I think cards like Insidious Roots come in as a way to save us. Roots being played earlier in the game means that when we start looping our Timeline Culler, we'll also be getting a plant along with every iteration of the loop. So, if we sacrifice a plant every time we make one, that will net us the extra health from our drain effect that makes our Timeline Culler loop net neutral on life, making it an infinite loop. Now, you can of course just banker plants, which means from full health starting point, we now have 18 additional plants from 17 power all the way down to 1 that can now be used as additional sacrifice fodder, so 18 additional drains, or just a way to beat your opponent senseless if you need a turn to untap with them. And every 2 plants you sacrifice will then give you 2 additional life back to, in theory, color again. So you can get upwards of 50 damage doing it the slower way. But if you just sacrifice the plants as you make them, it's net neutral and will just be an infinite drain combo, pending your opponent doesn't have a burn spell to reduce you below whatever life total you start from. So starting at 4 life, a lot more risky than starting at 10 or 12 life. So we have a combo, but we need ways to find our combo pieces and put them on the battlefield to begin with. So thankfully, there's one in particular that works pretty much with every aspect of our deck, as well as being able to make our color infinite with just a single Bloodwitch or Sephiroth in play. Dredger's Insight mills for 4 when it enters, grabbing us a creature, artifact, or land, which helps us set up our combo ASAP by hitting everything we could possibly want besides Insidious Roots, which if we have the Dredger's Insight, we don't really need the Insidious Roots. However, it has a nice static ability as well, gaining us a life whenever a creature or artifact leaves our graveyard. Yeah, that means our Timeline Culler will be a net -1 life in order to warp out of the graveyard, gaining an additional 1 life when it gets sacrificed, totaling a net 0 life to perform our loop, which means our combo is now an infinite loop, just like Cauldron Familiar and Ygritte would be in Pioneer. So we have 2 ways that we can establish an infinite drain loop with our combo. And now this is where you can diverge in your deck building a little bit. I'm not entirely sure if this combo package is consistent enough to explore as its own dedicated deck, if it needs a little bit of extra support with some extra redundancy, or if it should be a smaller package inside of a more fair deck. I'm also not entirely sold that we need both Insidious Roots and Dredger's Insight, but that's what I've been testing with so that we have redundant pieces, so we only need one or the other when going off with our deck. So we'll break it down a few different ways you can build around from what we've talked about, with a few different deck lists available in the description down below. I'm not necessarily going to be going through each list individually and then finishing off and moving cleanly on to the next one. Instead, I'm going to be showcasing a couple of the lists during when I talk about these cards, and then just continuing to talk about the cards as if we're still deciding which version of this deck we want to go with. So for starters, the rest of the Roots package from pre-rotation seems like it has a lot to offer in terms of finding the pieces for our combo consistently, as well as generally synergizing with the cards like Insidious Roots to give us an alternative angle of attack. So Overlord of the Baelmerk is a seemingly auto-inclusion into this deck, as filling the graveyard to grab combo-centric creature and creating plant tokens off of Roots is just a solid thing to be doing, especially when it can also net you a 5/5 body. Now, the only awkward part of Overlord is the fact that it can only retrieve non-avatar creatures, normally only an issue for other Overlords. But in this specific case, Sephiroth is also an avatar. That means our Sephiroth count is going to have to be maybe a little lower than the decks like the Orzhov Sacrifice deck, as this anti-synergy with Overlord of the Baelmerk can be a little bit awkward, and we may need to supplement having Sephiroth with having Vengeful Bloodlord so we can get one of those drain pieces off of our Overlord mills. The package of 1-drops from the more fair Roots deck could also be something we consider for our list, as Molt Tender and Llanowar Elves are crucial to setting us up for a potential turn 4 kill through their mana acceleration abilities. Rubblebelt Maverick also gets the nod as another 1-drop due to its ETB Surveil trigger being great for setting up our early turns, while binning one of the mill effects that can net us a plant token thanks to its ability to essentially scavenge itself from the graveyard. Now, this slot contends with quite a few other 1-drops in the format, even within older Roots decks in and of themselves. Originally, I was planning to run Snarling Gorehound as multiple surveils from 14 of our creatures, and every plant that helped churn out through our cards once we set up would help us go through our deck a lot faster. But the Maverick's immediate digging too deep means that we can be more consistent in setting up rather than just trying to go off. Now, one card I haven't mentioned from the fair Roots list is the Dragon Sniper card, a card that's made its way into these Roots decks towards the end of the pre-rotation standard format. As a 1-drop anti-aggro piece, it often traded up, buying you time to assemble the parts of your deck that would win you the game. Now, I'm not entirely sold on its presence in this specific style of deck, but with consistency still being a bit of a question mark for a combo with so many pieces involved, I'm not opposed to sticking Sniper into a more fair version of this Golgari Sacrifice list that only has a couple of these combo pieces inside it to win with out of left field, so we can just drop the Dragon Sniper, deter our opponent from doing things for a couple of turns or forcing them to remove our basically destructive wall of a creature, and then giving us time to build up our actual game-winning combo. Stepping back towards more a combo-centric build, Coati Scavenger is a piece of redundancy I really like having access to in these style of decks. A key part of the combo-centric deck from pre-rotation standard, Scavenger gives us a crucial rebuy effect for when we end up milling over multiple combo pieces with a single spell, but can only get one back immediately, such as when we Dredger's Insight without an Overlord of the Baelmerk to grab the second creature we may have milled. Now, Scavenger is also one of the only ways we can get our Dredger's Insight or Insidious Roots out of our graveyard, since some of the versions of the decks down below do not have mill pick one cards that can hit enchantments like Cash Grab. And even in the versions where I've added Cash Grab as yet another mill pick one card, having Scavenger to follow up the 2-drop mill card allows for turn 4 combos or turn 5 combos with added consistency, because we can just store it in our graveyard and pick it up later, specifically in game 1s when our opponent may not have all of their graveyard hate. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about 2 cards I'm going back and forth with in various versions of the deck: a Steelmancer Adept and Agatha's Soul Cauldron. While Cauldron may end up becoming a mainboard card just due to how many graveyard-based decks they're currently brewing up in Standard, the Steelmancer Adept is a tougher one to come to terms with. Now, much like Coati Scavenger, the Adept is a way to ensure we can replay our combo pieces from the graveyard on a crucial turn to execute our game plan. However, without Tyvar to grab it from the yard for free, let alone let it activate as if it had haste, or the fact that we can't use it to forage and create plants that immediately tap for mana, the adept loses value if you don't also run Cauldron in the main deck alongside it. Turning every plant you create into an Osteomancer adept with the ability to replay your graveyard full of creatures is an amazing synergy to have, but requires more slots than I'm willing to cut in certain lists. Now, you can see that the list with a more dedicated mill cards has a pair of both Adept and Cauldron added to the list, as this is a version that can leverage Insidious Roots and Rubblebelt Maverick more to turn our creatures into not just Osteomancer Adepts, but also redundant copies of Umbral Collar Zealot, so that we need one less combo piece on the battlefield to pop off. Now, the plight of all these lists, however, is the land base. It's a little tricky since we need to balance the fact that Golgari doesn't have a shock land in standard yet, with the downside of having the surveil lands enter the battlefield tapped. Now, we need a certain number of basic land types in order to allow our Verges to produce both colors, and although we're really low with just 20 lands total in our deck, having enough forests for our 1-drop green creatures, as well as the Great Arishan City being able to enter untapped, means we're actually pretty stretched on our land counts. 4 of each potentially untapped dual land, 3 ETB tap surveil lands, 1 utility land like Great Arishan City, and 8 total basics with a slight nudge towards forest is what I've settled on for most of our lists, while you may notice some iterations have an even split of forests and swamps in them. Now, despite their dual land capabilities, no copies of Starting Town have made the cut in this deck. I'm trying to save on life total, as well as keep our basic land type count around 11 so that our Verges are mostly online by turn 2 or 3. The sideboard is the section that will have to undergo the most changes since the metagame for standard is still overall pretty new and all over the place. And while we know some of the deck archetypes that are popular, it's still quite early in a new rotation to really metagame for specific decks, unless you're part of the Arena Championship, so I've kept our options a bit fair, open, and broad. Dark Confidant comes in for mid-range and control matches where our graveyard may be put a little under pressure and we need some natural card advantage over the selection from our milling effects. Bob will hurt a bit if we happen to flip over an Overlord of the Baelmerk, but with an average mana value of about 1.5 in some of these lists, we're most likely to achieve greatness at a much lower cost. Bob does have the duality of being a creature, meaning he is more susceptible to board wipes and removal, but can be sacrificed with one of our engine pieces to avoid us losing the game to our own top decks. So you can also consider Unholy Annex in this slot, but be forewarned, there are no natural demons in your deck. This means you'll be taking 2 yourself every time you wind up having the Annex trigger until you can unlock the Ritual Chamber side of things, adding a whole extra damage compared to Bob's average over those next 2 turns. Now, the other downside to Annex, as stated before with the enchantments in our deck, is that all of our card selection outlets are great at finding creatures, lands, or artifacts, but we don't have the best ways to grab an Unholy Annex outside of Coati Scavenger, or if we mill it within the 4 cards with Cash Grab. Insidious Fungus is our Cankerbloom replacement, and while it requires 2 mana to activate that Naturalize or Explore mode of the card, the fact that it's a creature that can be turned into a plant down the road means it has more upsides to running similar spell-based effects in our lists. Also, we can just stick that thing under an Agatha's Soul Cauldron in some of our lists, and all of a sudden, all of our plants become Naturalizes. Likewise, 2 copies of Disruptive Stormbrood are mostly for the adventure side petty revenge, but can also function as more expensive ways to deal with artifacts and enchantments down the road. Petty Revenge, as well as Shoot the Sheriff, are our ways of dealing with problematic threats from the opposing side, alongside Harvester of Misery, which can be a giant board wipe in the right matchup, even if we discard it for singleton target removal early on. Preacher of the Schism and Scavenging Ooze are cards that I would use to round out the sideboard in a lot of these lists, with Skoos competing for the slot against additional Agatha's Soul Cauldrons, as I mentioned earlier. Now again, the nature of Skoos being a creature gives it a slight edge considering the way our decks are built, although Dredger's Insight can also grab Cauldron off of a mill as well. Now, the life gain aspect of Scavenging Ooze isn't to be underestimated in matches where the opponent goes on the offensive, and the Ooze itself pairs extremely well with Insidious Roots to make a fair, slow army of flora. And you can even see in the more fair version of the Roots deck, Ooze is a 4 of in the main deck due to this synergy and it basically being a way to win a fair game. Preacher is another anti-aggro card, as well as a potential addition in certain mid-range matchups. Essentially a death-touching wall in our deck. The few times we do want to get frisky and swing at the Preacher, our deck can make good use out of the 1/1 tokens compared to other decks with our sacrifice synergies and the ability for them to add mana thanks to Enduring Vitality. As far as matchups or cards that the decks wants to avoid, we're still figuring out the specifics. However, if history serves as an indication for how this deck might play out, we have an idea of what we don't want to see. Public enemy number 1 for Roots decks in general are control decks. The permission, exile effects, and general solid removal options are a nightmare for creature-based combo decks to encounter when it wants to take the first couple of turns in a game to set itself up for success. A well-timed board wipe before we can establish enough drain damage or a crucial get lost or no more lies on a combo piece could delay our deck multiple turns and be the difference between winning and losing for us. Now, the one upside, however, is that the loss of temporary lockdown and the addition of Pinnacle Star Cage is a benefit for our deck specifically. Now, while we still lose our creatures, we get to keep all of our enchantments, meaning we can easily rebuild a plant army the following turn and have the ability to go off right after. Likewise, Enduring Vitality avoids the cage and must be dealt with via exile removal or 2 specific removal spells, allowing us to sort of skip finding another piece of our combo in the event of a board wipe. Now, extremely fast decks are also an issue for this deck, as we want some time to set things up and the threats that we do have are generally pretty tiny. Plenty of X1s and X2s are prime for Burst Lightning and Fire Magic to deal with, while the increasing size of cards like VV or trampling threats like the Mouse package could be more difficult for us to survive through. Trample in specifics is something that a block sacrifice type strategy really doesn't want to have to calculate the damage for, because if you block, sacrifice your thing, gain a life with your draining effect, and your opponent gives their creature trample, it's not going to be a good time for your life total. Now, the other card we really don't want to see on the opposing side of the battlefield is something we actually have in our own deck. Yeah, Sephiroth, Fabled Soldier. Yep. Even though he's on our side, we're still getting the Ares treatment with Sephiroth ability triggers on both players' creatures dying. That means our loops need a second drain effect to even deal damage to the Sephiroth player, let alone an extra piece of life gain to not lose the game ourselves to our Culler loops, and we're gonna have to still deal with our opponent's flipped Sephiroth, so unless we actually go off that turn, the longer game plan that we're trying to execute as a backup just doesn't work against other Sephiroths. Now, on the more positive side, however, a metagame full of mid-range decks or other combo decks where the race to end the game is on are situations where this deck could potentially thrive. Playing against decks like the Naya Yuna deck or Dimir midrange gives us a bit of time to set up on our own side of the battlefield, as they aren't going to be putting us low enough to lose within the first few turns, and they generally lack a lot of sweeper effects, especially in game number 1s. Now, 1-for-1 removal can be effective against pieces of our combo, but if they don't follow it up with a fast enough clock, we can just rebuy them from our graveyard while stashing extra copies in our hand for use later on when they've run out of interaction. Now, funnily enough, opposing Soul Cauldrons or single target graveyard hate like Ghost Vacuum haven't been the most oppressive when I've been trying the deck out. So long as we have an Insidious Roots in play, our opponent end up just creating an army of plant tokens for us that grow every time, giving us mana to play out our Overlords as normal creatures and hardcast Sephiroth alongside multiple spells in a turn backed up by that. Even with just a Dredger's Insight, it gains us a lot of life for them to have to slog through, while we can still just play a normal sacrifice game to beat them down with. Likewise, all of our mill cards that return something do so in one action. So we can always act first, or they have to act before we actually mill. Likewise, our actual combo with Timeline Culler is done with our priority on our turn. The only way they can get rid of Timeline Culler is if we don't have the mana to bring it out of the graveyard immediately, or they're doing it on their turn if we've milled it over with like a cash grab or something. There is one more window where they can remove our Timeline Culler, which is in response to our drain trigger going on the stack, since that will be when the color is in the graveyard, but a redundant copy of Timeline Culler will continue our loop. All in all, I'm not quite sure where this combo is going to land in the grand scheme of Standard, or if this deck in general is going to have a slot in the metagame. But what I do know is that it's scratching an itch for a deck like Roots that I was sad was leaving the format. And while at the end of the day, it's a very similar game plan to what the Orzhov decks are doing, I think the potential one-hit KO, as well as the redundancy that this list has with a bunch of its mill take-a-piece kind of cards, give this deck specific advantages that those decks don't just quite have access to, specifically in terms of card velocity. Now, as you can tell, I'm still trying to iterate on what could be the best possible version of the list. In general, I was looking at combo first kind of decks, but looking back at the fair Roots list with just a couple of combo pieces acting as like Cryptolith Rites and the potential end game that way may be the best way to go for it. But I'm still left wondering if, despite the poor mana base in Standard right now, there could be a Jund or Abzan version out there as well that could be in the works. Now, red is obviously for things like Terra to get back Insight, Roots, Overlord, and even Enduring Vitality if we need to, while the white side of things could ensure our combo can't be interacted with, as well as adding in additional things from the normal Orzhov Sacrifice packages, such as additional sack outlets or things to protect ourselves like Voice of Victory. Now, the possibilities are there pending the mana base cooperates with us, which might mean we need to wait for the rest of the shock lands to be introduced back into Standard before we start iterating down those multicolor pathways for the Roots deck. So how do you feel about the combo in general? Is it just too many pieces, or is it kind of something that you think could work if we find the right shell for it? So is it a Standard contender, or is it just something that is a fantasy land for me? Let me know what you think about the combo, the deck, or anything else about Standard down in the comments below. And while you are there, make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this kind of theory crafting session on the Standard metagame from myself. Of course, if you would like to, and if you would be able to help monetarily support the channel, you could become one of my members. The members over here help support this and every single video that goes on my channel by giving me a little bit of extra financial support while I am creating the content through both my gameplay commentary as well as videos like this where I describe different deck techs and kind of card interactions, as well as all of the tournament recap coverage that I normally do and will be doing up through this RC season as well. Of course, if you become a member, you get special benefits such as Discord access, a direct line to me so we can chat Magic while I should probably be working or doing something else with my time, but you can be able to help support me. I'm of course going to be able to give back my support towards you as well. So if you are so inclined to, you can click the join button down below or on the home page of my channel to show your devotion. As always, I would love it, and I'd hope you would love it, to just tap that subscribe button, because that helps you stay up to date whenever I release new deck techs, metagame analysis, or just in general Magic content like this. See you in Standard.